भगवान कृष्ण तो हमेशा दूध पीते थे, मक्खन खाते थे, दही खाते थे. So he has always been the brand ambassador who has promoted the milk industry and the dairy industry. So why is it that now things are changing, and why is it that people believe that this is not good for us? So which means, was Lord Krishna also, promoting something which was not correct?
You know, the reason there was a shortage of milk when there were so many cows is because they understood that the milk was not for us, that the calf had to drink it first. And if there happened to be some milk left, then they could use it. Remember that this was a time when there were no refrigeration, there was no packaged food, there could be shortages. So, at the time of shortage, you may hunt an animal or you may drink some milk because that was a way to survive. But today it's not. So, but even then, they did it mindfully by letting the calf drink before consuming the milk.
Whereas when we see role models and examples like Virat Kohli, who also turned from being a non-vegetarian to a vegetarian or rather vegan now. His wife Anushka Sharma is a vegan. In olden times when they used to actually depict somebody who was very good and somebody who was a saint would actually eat sattvic khana, and somebody who would be projected as Rakshas would be eating meat, and they would show that he's eating something which is related with meat, and something which would definitely not be a food which is consumed by humans.
Yeah, milk contains omorphin, which is to addict the baby to the mother. Little slaughterhouses would open up on the road because people would just eat meat on Sundays because they could get up and buy the meat and cook it and then go back to sleep. But you can't do this on every day. But now we're eating every day of the week.
हम जो भी कहते हैं, जो सोचते हैं और जो मानते हैं, वो सिर्फ एक आदत है या एक सच। आज हम मिलने जा रहे हैं डॉक्टर नंदिता शाह से, जो हमें एक नया पर्सपेक्टिव दिखाएगी फूड, हेल्थ और कंपैशन को लेकर। क्या एक प्लांट बेस्ड लाइफस्टाइल सिर्फ एक डाइट है या एक कॉन्शियस अवेकनिंग? लेट्स ब्रेक मिथ्स, शिफ्ट पर्सपेक्टिव्स एंड गो बियॉन्ड। Welcome to Perception and Beyond, Dr. Shah.
Thank you.
So my first question that I would like to ask you is that what was the most profound moment that made you realize that veganism is the only ethical choice for you?
Well, I can't say it was a specific moment. It happened almost 40 years ago, when in the 1980s actually, when Beauty Without Cruelty, which is an animal rights educational organization, was doing a research on cheese in India. Because before that, hardly anyone ate cheese, but then there was cheese coming, and cheese is originally curdled with the inner lining of the calf's stomach. So let me explain. In order for us to consume milk, the calf doesn't get it, because the cow becomes a mother because she's artificially inseminated, and then her calf is taken away from her or tied away, often dies of starvation. And in order to curdle the cheese, because an older cow will not have that enzyme that curdles the cheese, that curdles the milk. So in order to curdle the milk, the inner lining of the calf is used. That's so even today for all over India. But Beauty Without Cruelty was trying to make cheese in India vegetarian, which they succeeded. And so now, in most cases, cheese is made with microbial rennet. That means it's microbes that are curdling the milk. So my father was um, helping with Beauty Without Cruelty. And so when he found this out, he was helping with that, and he said that we should stop milk. And it didn't go into our minds immediately. So we were so used to having milk, and I used to love milk. I thought it was a health drink, and I would have milk in the morning, afternoon, and night. 3 glasses of milk per day, plus curds and all of that. And this was relatively new in India at that time, because mm, milk in Bombay was not easily available. And we had to get milk from ration booths and all. And I used to go to a school where they used to get milk and serve us milk at lunch as well. But this was not common. So I grew up loving milk and loving the way it felt, made my stomach full. And so when I found this out, it took me some time to change. But I was always so grateful that I was vegetarian because I can't even imagine eating an animal that has been killed for me. But that's because I grew up vegetarian, right? And and so this milk thing was kind of percolating in, and I reduced my dairy consumption, but I didn't completely give up things that were made with dairy. Like I may not be having milk to drink, but I was still having something with maybe a bit of cheese on top, and especially things that were made with ghee or butter or maybe some curd like dhokla or something like that. And it was really about 20 years later that somebody was sitting in my living room, and on the table was a bowl of butter toffees, which I didn't eat because I don't eat candies, but somebody had given it to me and it was on my table. And he said, "No, I don't eat that." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because it has butter in it." And at that moment, it sort of clicked. And I said, "Okay, now I have to become 100% vegan. If he can do it, why can't I?" And I realized that the only reason I wasn't doing it, even though it was against my ethics, was because I sensed deprivation. So as soon as I realized my own hypocrisy, I just stopped immediately.
Wonderful. And I think, see, we come from a school of thought that दूध पीना बहुत ज़रूरी है for your bone health, for your calcium supplements. Because the first thing my parents would ask me is that calcium की ज़रूरत नहीं है, but दूध पियो 2 टाइम तो calcium आराम से मिल जाएगा. And when we were school going children, we used to have milk twice a day. And we were raised with curd and ghar ka makhan and, all those dairy products because that was like the way of living life. Today, the first shock that I got in my life was that when I went to my son's pediatrician and said that, what is the kind of diet we should follow, because he always had allergy issues. The first thing he said was that he should not consume milk. And I was like, what nonsense are you talking? Because we've always been given this understanding that milk is the best thing for your child. And if you are coming with that kind of perspective, I mean, how will a child survive without milk? And then the doctor says it's your mindset problem. It's not your child's problem. The way you will condition your child, the child will grow up according to that. So there is nothing like child cannot live without milk or child will only survive if there is milk or dairy products, around him. And that made me think that I think that makes a lot of sense because we condition our children that doodh piyo, doodh piyo, and we just create that environment that live with curd, live with milk, and there's butter loaded on your food and in your sandwiches, in your parathas. So I think we are the ones who condition, and I think a lot of people also have this mindset that dairy is a very harmless vegetarian food.
But if you think about it, it's not as harmless as we think it is, because if you notice, vegetarians and non-vegetarians get the same disease. Because when a non-vegetarian goes out to eat, they'll order chicken. And when a vegetarian goes out to eat, they'll order paneer. And paneer and chicken are the same in our body: high protein, high fat, and no fiber. And it will cause the same disease. But, if we think about it, in nature, every mammal produces milk only for their young. And no animal drinks another animal's milk. Like Pigs don't drink goat's milk and monkeys don't drink elephant's milk, but we drink another animal's milk. So we don't really think about how shocking it is. Like, I remember thinking that how can any mother take away another mother's milk and give it to her baby? And I once said it to a mother who was nursing her baby, and she wrote back to me after that and said that, thanks to that, I've never given my child milk. So, instinctively, we all know what we should eat, but we are conditioned to eat other things. And every baby loves their mother's milk. They don't want to leave their mother's milk. But you first give them cow's milk, they will say no. And that's why mothers put sugar, cocoa, and everything so that the baby will drink it, to coerce the baby to drink it. And then we get addicted to it. Dairy is very addictive.
Absolutely. And I've always seen these children who are so dependent on butter and cheese. I think it's only when we introduce these kind of products to the family or to our children, that is when they get the taste and they get used to and they are addicted to, these kind of
Yeah,
foods.
milk contains casomorphin, which is to addict the baby to the mother. So when we consume, especially concentrated um, foods, dairy foods like paneer or cheese, then we are consuming a lot more casomorphin, which is more addictive. So cheese is very addictive. I just think, imagine cheese smells like old socks. If you open a fridge which has cheese sitting there, the fridge stinks. But we've all grown accustomed to having cheese because it's so addictive. I know that because I didn't want to leave cheese when I first heard about all this.
So the biggest misconception around the dairy is that it's a pure vegetarian food or vegetarian diet.
Absolutely. Nothing could be further from the truth because, I mean, when we drink milk, a calf dies. That's the reality.
You heal from Guillain-Barre without any modern medicine, and Guillain-Barre is largely to do with neurological disorder.
Right. So, you know what? Guillain-Barre is an acute autoimmune disease, which means that all the nerve sheaths are destroyed. But because it's acute, it can lead to either death or recovery. And most people, when they get Guillain-Barre, and now you know that there are many cases of Guillain-Barre thanks to vaccines. One of the causes of Guillain-Barre is vaccines, and another cause is foreign proteins. Like, at least in my medical books, chicken was one of the causes of Guillain-Barre. Yeah. So, it's any foreign protein that causes autoimmune diseases. And I was vegetarian, I didn't have chicken. I can only relate it to a rabies vaccination that I had around that time. And um, even though it's a neurological disorder, it's not the nerves that are destroyed, but the myelin sheath that is destroyed, which means there's a chance for recovery. But when the nerves are destroyed, which happens in many autoimmune diseases, then it's hard to recover, harder. Therefore, it's really important to recognize the foods or the lifestyle that we are supposed to lead. Because if we lead a lifestyle that is against what nature recommended for us, we are bound to get sick. And nowadays, so many people have autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and ankylosing spondylitis and scleroderma and vitiligo. And I mean, there's so many, more than 100 autoimmune diseases. When we were in college, though, we hadn't identified so many at least, and it was a lot rarer. Now the number of vaccinations have increased and the number of animal product eating has increased, and now we have all these problems.
But how did you actually cure yourself through plant-based diet and whole food that you were
Okay,
like?
so you know what? It was actually an acute disease, right? Acute disease is like a fever. It will recover or it will lead to death. So I knew that because I was a doctor. I am a doctor, right? And I knew that I had Guillain-Barre, and I knew that it can recover. I also knew because everyone told me to get admitted in the hospital, and I also knew the potential side effects of steroids and of immunoglobulins, which was the treatment for this at that time. And I knew that I didn't want to go through that. So I was very lucky that, like, first I went to my friend's house because I was paralyzed. And then I was at my father's house, and he got hospital um, helpers to, one day person and one night assistant to help me with all the bodily functions and eating and even turning in bed. I couldn't even turn in bed. So I was totally paralyzed. So, but we decided to do work at it only at home.
But then how did you self-heal with such a, difficult?
So it's an acute disease. So it is self-limiting. Unlike rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, these are not really self-limiting, but they can be. For example, rheumatoid arthritis can be controlled and even brought into remission, or ankylosing spondylitis, and we have so many people like this, by eating and living the way we were designed to.
So you had to basically change the way you eat, what you eat, your lifestyle. Do all these things also come into play when you have
So,
to
you
heal
know what? I
yourself?
had already started the process even before I got sick, and I wasn't 100% at that time, and I didn't know better. So, there were some things even during my illness that I had, which were very small amounts, but which were dairy, because at my father's place he had stopped getting dairy, but just because I couldn't eat certain things, sometimes people brought things for me, and I had something made in curd or something like that. So I wasn't 100% plant-based, but when I got well, I started realizing how important it is. So, for example, you brought up the topic of calcium. And being a doctor, I also thought that you need calcium, you need milk for calcium because that's what we've been told. But when I started reading medical journals, I understood that the maximum osteoporosis is in the countries with the maximum dairy consumption. So it wasn't making sense. And at that time, I had already been teaching all over the world. So I had already seen patients outside of India, and I had seen that there were more cases of osteoporosis in Europe and in USA as compared to India. I mean, there were hardly any cases of osteoporosis at that time in India. Now it has grown. But here's what: Indians in general all consume dairy. Then how do they end up with osteoporosis? Right? Teeth are bones. Then why is everyone getting cavities? So, is it really true that we need milk for calcium? Like, how does a cow get the calcium? And calcium is a mineral, it comes from the ground. And if one does a little bit of research, then one knows that sesame contains 10 times the amount of calcium than milk. And all nuts and seeds and greens have more calcium than cow's milk. But you know what? Human milk has less calcium than cow's milk, and human milk is enough for a baby that's born that has no bones, only cartilage. You can drop a baby and no fracture because babies don't have bones. the cartilage has to ossify into bones. And so, when a baby is born or a young child needs the maximum amount of calcium, and that is there in mother's milk, and that amount is less than green leafy vegetables, nuts, seeds. It's even less than the amount of calcium in potato chips. Imagine that we have been told a lie all this time, and guess who's telling the lie? The one who wants to sell it. So, we have to look at everything that we're doing and see what is true and what is commercial, because our lives are very commercial now.
So, which means that it's a complete scam if we say that our life is incomplete without dairy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, India has used dairy to a smaller or a larger extent, because remember that before refrigeration, nobody could consume dairy the way we are, right? When I was young, cheese was not made in India, and paneer was a way to rescue spoilt milk. But today, paneer is an item in cheeses everywhere, even on dosas, right? So we have to remember that there was a whole culture living without dairy, because there was a time that if you didn't have your own cow, you wouldn't have dairy, right? Now, dairy has been used in the West, but whole of Southeast Asia never used milk. So traditionally, there's no milk in any of the recipes from Thailand or Japan or China or Burma or even Sri Lanka, our nearest neighbor. None of them use dairy, but we did, perhaps because of the Indian Aryan influence or whatever. But, you know, it's not really a necessity, because whole cultures have survived without it.
So, which means that India is one of the largest consumers of dairy in the world.
I wouldn't say that. India is the largest producer of dairy in the world. That's for sure. But per capita, India may not be the largest consumer, because,
One of the
yeah,
largest.
because the countries which consume cheese, 1 ounce of cheese is 16 ounces of milk. So if you're consuming cheese, then you've gone way beyond the Indians, because the average Indian doesn't consume cheese. It's only in the urban areas that we consume so much cheese, right?
So, you've authored a book, Reversing Diabetes in 21 Days.
Yes.
First of all, we cannot believe that diabetes can be reversed, because everybody has this belief that once you have diabetes, it can never go away from your body or from your system. So, how are people benefiting from what you are educating them through your book?
Right. So, first of all, what is reversal? Reversal is normal blood sugars and no medicines, right? And I conducted 21-day health retreat, 21 days. People come in on medications, then we do all the tests in the beginning and cut down medications as we go along, as they get better, and do all the tests in the end, so they can actually see the difference right from the beginning to the end. And there are so many people who have got out of diabetes within those 21 days, which means, our body always works to heal. And the reason we're getting sick is because we are eating and living the wrong way. So, if we can change that and understand why, and so, if you think about it, nobody gets cured with medicines, not just for diabetes, for anything. Because a medicine can only temporarily remove symptoms. But body always works to heal. If we understand what is the cause of diabetes and remove it, diabetes has to go.
So, can you share a transformational story of any of your patient which left a long term impact on you?
I'm just going to share a story of one of my earliest patients because that's like the biggest impact. Once I started knowing that diabetes can be easily reversed, then I mean, it's not so impactful anymore. I know that anybody can do it, or almost anybody, not everybody, because there are certain things that we do that make us permanently diabetic, but those are rare. So almost anybody can do it. So, right, I had a patient who had diabetes for 30 years and who also was manic depressive, bipolar. And his daughter was a doctor, and his daughter didn't give him any medicine for bipolar because she knew that the medicines were addictive, the medicines could cause harm. But for diabetes, he had to be treated. And he was being treated, but as diabetes has so many complications, he was losing his eyesight. And despite all the medications at that time, remember it was years ago, despite all the medications, the eyes, the blindness was not controlled, and nor was the blood sugar completely controlled. So at that time, I was a homeopath. I was practicing homeopathy, and she came to me, and I gave him some medicines, and he got better. And but after a few months, he came back with the same problems. And after some time, I said, why don't we stop all the dairy? Because he was already vegetarian. And he was a little hesitant because he said, I've already changed so many things. Do I have to do this? But when he was losing his eyesight, imagine what it's like to lose. He said, let me try it. And he actually regained his eyesight. Not only did he regain his eyesight, this is why it's so impactful for me, that he got free of bipolar disorder once we had stopped all the diabetic medicines. So this took some time. But imagine that he got over bipolar disorder, and his daughter, who was a doctor, came to me and said, I have got my father back. Imagine that. It could have been that the medicines for diabetes were causing the bipolar disorder. We don't know. We don't know the real reason for that, but he got completely well. And that's the magic of eating and living the way we should, that you can get well, not just from the disease you want to get well from, but from everything, because the body works to heal holistically.
Doc, you had mentioned that veganism has got a lot to do with an individual's compassion and true values. And of course, to some extent, even I agree because I am also very compassionate when it comes to animals. So, why do people struggle to align this in their mind, and how can we actually explain and bring 2 plus 2 together?
Okay, I think people turn vegan for health, environment, or animals. So everyone is not really doing it for the same reasons. But for example, me, I've started this organization called SHARAN, and SHARAN is an acronym for Sanctuary for Health and Reconnection to Animals and Nature. So I combine all of them in a sense. But it really happened because when I moved from Mumbai to Auroville, I was living in nature. And the day I moved in, actually, a cat moved in with me. So I was watching animals that I had never lived with before. And I wasn't feeding her or doing anything. She was just there. So um, I was watching her and I realized that animals in nature know how to stay well. I mean, that cat, when she was sick, would stop eating and eat grass in order to clean her digestive tract so that she could be well. But um, we don't, we take medicines. So it started brewing in my mind that, hey, how can we also understand? And cats cannot be more intelligent than we are. And so, if we recognize what we're doing wrong, we can correct all these things. And that's where it all started. But you, so I feel that, everyone is vegan. Actually, everyone is vegan at heart. Because if you ask anyone, would you harm or kill an animal unnecessarily? Almost everyone will say no.
Also, I think if people are told that they have to hunt and they have to kill an animal to eat, most of them will say, I can't do it.
Right. Because, uh, you know, it's not just because we're compassionate, but because instinctively it's not our food. Like, for example, if you were to go to a farm or an orchard and you see fruits and vegetables, instinctively you would feel like picking it. But if you see a chicken walk by or a goat or a cow, we don't salivate because we can't pounce on the animal. We can't tear it apart and we definitely can't eat it raw, which means that we're not a true carnivore or omnivore. So, putting the wrong food in our body is like putting diesel in a car which runs on petrol. It will never work. It's like giving a cow meat or a lion grass. Can't do it.
So true, so true. And I think a lot of people also give this logic when we talk about, converting from being a non vegetarian to vegetarian
Mhm.
or to becoming a vegan is that I get my protein source from animals or from dairy.
Right.
So then how much of protein is required in one person's body, and from where do you get protein source if they are not consuming dairy or non-vegetarian food?
Right, right. And so, honestly, that's like the calcium myth. That's another myth that we've been told. Obviously, we all need enough protein, but we don't need animals to get our protein because where does a cow get the protein? Where does a horse get the protein? Where does the elephant get the protein? Right? So, protein is found in every single cell. And therefore, almost none of us know somebody deficient in protein. We don't even know the symptoms of, I mean, I do because I'm a doctor, but most people don't even know the symptoms of protein deficiency. And if you ask them what are the symptoms of protein deficiency, they'll say weakness. And that's only because they've been taught these days, only recently, I mean, in the last, say, 3 decades, that you need to take protein, more protein, to build muscles. That's not true either. But, um, you know, it's about selling whey protein. Nobody even knows what whey protein is. So, whey protein is uh, the substance that we throw away when we make paneer or cheese, the water. Like if you curdle milk and you have your paneer, have you ever made paneer? So if you curdle milk and you make the paneer, then the water is whey. When you curdle cheese and you have the solid substance, the water is whey. So the water was being thrown away till someone got the bright idea that let's make money out of this as well. And so they dehydrated it and sold it as whey protein. So now it sells at the price of gold, and we think that we need whey protein, but we really don't. Like when I was young, they would say glucose D for energy. And that's true, actually, that, if we want more energy, if you want to run a marathon, you shouldn't have protein. You should have carbohydrates or sugars in the form of fruits, not, I mean, not really glucose D, but what nature gives us, carbohydrates. And proteins is the opposite because if you've ever eaten a high protein diet, say you go out and you eat chicken or cheese, do you feel energetic after that? Or paneer, right? Do you feel energetic after that? No. You feel like you can't stand out up from the table. It's that heavy, right? And you will feel full for a really long time. Like maybe you don't feel hungry for 6 hours. When I moved to Oroville, people didn't eat meat or chicken and everyone didn't have fridges. So they would eat meat only on Sundays because on Sunday you don't have to go to work.
Eat and sleep.
Yeah, you wake up, you cook, you eat, you sleep. So um, when I used to go to Europe, people my age would tell me that we'd have fish on Fridays and meat on Sundays, and that was it. And you can imagine that without refrigeration, how much meat can you have, right? So even in Oroville, when I moved to Oroville 25 years ago, little slaughterhouses would open up on the road because people would just eat meat on Sundays because they could get up and buy the meat and cook it and then go back to sleep. But you can't do this on every day. But now we're eating every day of the week. And, when I was teaching in Europe initially, I would go and stay at any hotel, and breakfast would just be bread rolls with butter and jam and tea and coffee and maybe juice if lucky. But now those very same hotels serve a whole array of eggs, a whole array of cold cuts, all kinds of cheeses, all kinds of animal products. But now they're changing. A few years ago, I went to Europe, and those same hotels have vegan products, plant based milk, vegan yogurt, muesli, all kinds of things too. So, people are realizing it. Like once you go down all the way and get really sick, you realize, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure with this change now that people are experiencing, with so much of awareness of social media and PETA doing so much of awareness about, animal cruelty, a lot of people will also go back to becoming a vegan or a vegetarian because eventually people also have that compassion muscle within them. Not just compassion, the environment, the health perspective. I think all
Are
these three,
together,
when these three
yes.
come
I
together.
mean, yes and no. I feel like we are herd animals. We always want to do what the rest of the world does. And so as long as there's a higher number of people eating meat, people go towards meat. It doesn't matter what they think or what they feel or what they feel is ethical, but they just go with the crowd. And so it's a process. Like it's only for those who can think for themselves and who are willing to not just be a herd animal and follow the crowd.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Doc, can you give us some examples, or rather some misconceptions or some lies, I would say, that the food industry is talking about, and how does it impact our health and overall environment?
So we already talked about calcium and protein, and we have to recognize that, like, for example, grains. So many people are lactose intolerant because milk is not our food. So many people are um, gluten intolerant, right? And if you think about it, if you go to a farm and you see wheat and rice growing, our mouth doesn't water because we can't eat it raw, but we are eating it with every meal, right? And when we help people reverse diseases, we don't stop the grains because you can't change everything all at once. So, and the grains are close enough to plant based that like you can get by. But we have to remember that because it's not our food, therefore we're getting gluten intolerance. Because milk is not our food, therefore we have lactose intolerance, and so on. We all have lactose intolerance, some know it, some don't. right? Remember, I said that it was the inner lining of the calf's stomach. You can't take a cow's stomach because a cow doesn't have that enzyme. It's the same with us. Like our stomach doesn't produce the enzyme rennet in order to, or renin, in order to curdle milk. And so when we consume dairy, it's difficult to digest.
Absolutely. And that is why this food industry creates a particular perception about the dairy and different kind of foods, and they package them in such a way that you actually naturally get attracted to these
And
kind of
they're
products.
getting away with it because of our lack of knowledge. For example, now Nandini in South India and Amul in Gujarat, they have started selling milk products which have been fortified or with whey protein or excess protein, added protein. And what people don't realize is that today we don't have diseases of protein deficiency. Protein deficiency only comes in starvation and some very severe kidney diseases. But we do have diseases of protein excess.
Oh, okay.
We have a lot of diseases of protein excess, and I've seen kidney disease is one of them. Anyone who has kidney disease is told not to have high protein diet. But I've seen that many of the young men, they can be under 30, getting kidney disease, on the verge of kidney transplant, or even had kidney transplant. Why did it happen? Because they were taking extra proteins, because their gym instructor was telling them to take protein.
Absolutely. And I think every uh, fitness enthusiast has been advised to have X amount of protein every day apart from the regular meal, which also builds that psychological block that if I'm not having protein, I'm not building muscles or I'm not losing weight.
And nature would never be that crazy. Like nature gives us everything in abundance. We don't have to count the protein. The horses don't count their protein. The elephants don't count their protein. They get enough of it just by eating the foods that they instinctively are attracted to, that they could eat raw. You know that the amount of protein, first of all, most people don't know what protein is good for. Protein, protein is a food for growth and repair, not for energy, right? So most people don't know that the amount of protein in human milk is one third that of cow's milk, which is why when if you don't give an infant formula milk, then you have to dilute cow's milk by 3 times and add sugar in order to give it to a human baby to make it somewhat close to human milk. Now, protein is a food for growth. Human milk contains enough protein for all our growth needs. And human baby doubles its weight in 6 months and triples its weight in 1 year. After that, do we ever grow at that rate? Hopefully not, right? So we never need as a percentage more protein than we needed as an infant. And the percentage of protein in human milk and the percentage of protein in fruit is the same, which means that you can literally be a fruitarian and get all your protein needs met. So much so that there are fruitarian bodybuilders, people who are building their body, all these muscles and everything just on fruits.
And all those people who believe that you are supposed to have 12 egg whites every day, mix egg with milk, or have like a protein shake with egg whites. So, all that is not required.
No, in fact, this is protein without fiber. This is food that we're never supposed to eat. It can cause not just constipation, but a whole host of other problems. Like, for example, today, so many people suffer from hormonal problems, right? Now, we don't think about how do we get those eggs, because today we have manipulated chicken to lay an egg almost every day. That means that if the hen doesn't lay 250 eggs a year, which is not every day still, but if the hen doesn't lay 250 eggs a year, then it's not productive. Do you know that a normal hen lays about 25 eggs a year?
Oh,
And
wow.
we have manipulated these hens to lay 250 eggs a year. And this is done by various means, amongst which are hormones. So now people are consuming hormones in the form of dairy, eggs, meat, because animals produce the same hormones that we do. And we are getting all kinds of hormonal imbalances like diabetes, insulin is a hormone, diabetes, premature puberty, gynecomastia. You see men with women like breasts these days. So that's also because of hormonal problems. And then hirsutism, like hair growing on your face in women, and hypothyroidism and PCOD and infertility and breast, prostate, and ovarian cancer are hormone dependent cancer. And why is all this happening? Because we are taking in hormones through animal products every day of our lives. I mean, we have no option but to get sick, I feel.
Correct. Absolutely. And I think it's time people start getting into that realization that meat or dairy is not a part of food chain, which most people want to believe that eating meat is a part of human beings' food chain, which is not
And
correct.
therefore, the more people that follow this path, because most people, as I said, are herd animals. So like, the more people who follow this path, the more everyone will, just because they want to be like the others. When I used to go, because I was teaching in Europe and America, when I used to go and say I'm vegetarian, because initially I was vegetarian, people would say, oh, I hardly eat any meat. I'm like, okay. And then when I used to say I'm vegan, it would be the same. When I say I don't have a TV, they say I hardly watch TV. I mean, people just like to be like other people, and these sentences come almost automatically, like, hey, I also do this. So we have to really check ourselves and think, are we doing what is best for us? Or are we just doing things because we've been conditioned to doing things? And that's not just with food, it's also with, like, just this morning I was speaking to a patient, and she was telling me how she was vegan, actually vegan for last 4 years, but she was telling me how she um, works in an office as a digital, I forgot what she was doing, but so it's a very stressful job, and she doesn't get home till late evening, and then she has to cook for her 8-year-old. And she said, I never took off, I mean, except for holidays, of course. And I just feel like, what's the point of not being productive? But I'm thinking, okay, you're so sick, and if you don't take charge of your health now, you won't be there for your child. And what's the point of doing something productive if you're not living your we are all here because we have a purpose, a spiritual purpose. And if you're not living your spiritual purpose, but you're just making money for some company, and now I remembered which one it was, but I won't mention. Uh, but if you're just making money for some company and you're working so hard, but you're not living your spiritual purpose, you're not happy with your work, what's the point? And then you're sick.
It's like following the rat race and working like a
Yeah.
machine.
And you're so sick, and at this age.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I want to ask you that how does animal agriculture contribute to water scarcity? Because that's one point everybody has been talking about. And does it contribute to deforestation and climate change as well?
Actually, animal agriculture is the biggest driver of climate change in the world today. So, animal agriculture produces more greenhouse gases than all the vehicles combined. That means trains, planes, cars combined. And that's because, there are more animals on the planet than human beings right now, or at any given point, that are raised for the livestock industry. And today we are 8 billion, but more than 80 billion land animals are slaughtered every year. 80 billion land animals. That's not even counting sea animals. Now, all these animals need land, food, air, and water. If we are raising this whole load of animals so that we can eat them, we are like, let me put it this way, it takes 12 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of meat, maybe more than that. But imagine that you could feed 12 people with the same amount of inputs that you could feed one person if they are non vegetarian. That means that so many people are starving today because others are eating more than their share. And that is also something to think about. That means that if you go to Africa, you see it. People are raising animals that they will never eat in Africa because they're exporting them to Europe so that they can eat them. If you go to South America, people are raising soy to feed animals in their country and other parts of the world, but that's causing deforestation, right? Remember that when we eat chicken, they are, all the bycatch of fish is fed to chickens. So we are emptying oceans just to eat meat and fish, not just fish, but meat and fish, right? So we are at the brink. I mean, maybe there are people who think we are far too gone and we can't even recover. But we are really at a bad stage in the history of the world.
Absolutely. I think it's a great matter of concern because ultimately all these things have a great impact on the environment. So whether it is, your forest or even the land which you are just talking about, I think we have to become very mindful of the fact that how do we want our generations to live in future?
Yes, that's another important thing because there is no future for the children of today.
True, very true. What is the easiest first step if someone wants to transition to a plant-based diet from being either vegetarian or a non-vegetarian? And what is the first step that one can take?
I would say that it's awareness because the minute you start understanding all these things, something changes. And then like progress, not perfection. Like, don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do as much as you can, and the rest just follows. I think it depends on the person also, because if you're sick, I've seen people who are sick willing to do everything and get well. But if you're not sick, then I would just say do as much as you can.
Absolutely. Another point that I want to raise over here is that the biggest rationale people come up with when it comes to converting from vegetarian to becoming a vegan is that भगवान कृष्ण तो हमेशा दूध पीते थे, मक्खन खाते थे, दही खाते थे. So he has always been the brand ambassador who has promoted the milk industry and the dairy industry. So why is it that now things are changing, and why is it that people believe that this is not good for us? So which means, was Lord Krishna also I mean, promoting something which was not correct?
Right. And that's a good question. That's a question that everyone asks. And think about it. How many cows did Krishna have? And when I ask this question, some people say 100 and others say thousands. But let's say 100. Hmm? So if you have 100 cows, how much milk or milk products would you need to steal? And when I say this, people begin to understand because, the reason there was a shortage of milk when there were so many cows is because they understood that the milk was not for us, that the calf had to drink it first. And if there happened to be some milk left, then they could use it. Remember that this was a time when there were no refrigeration, there was no packaged food, there could be shortages. So, at the time of shortage, you may hunt an animal or you may drink some milk because that was a way to survive. But today it's not, right? So, but even then they did it mindfully by letting the calf drink before consuming the milk. But today it's opposite. The farmer will take the calf to the mother if the calf is still there, just to start the flow, and immediately pull the calf away and tie it up and tie the legs of the cow and then milk the cow. And of course, it's worse than this in most places because now the cows are on milk machines, and the milk machines are so bad that, they go on even when the udder is empty. So they're actually injuring the udder, and there's blood and pus in the milk. Actually, there's no milk without pus in it because the cow's udders are always injured when a human or milk machines try to extract more milk. So there's so many reasons that we should stop consuming dairy. Not just because it harms cows, but because it's literally killing us. And so, killing us health wise, environment wise, and it's also a big psychological shift. You know, most people don't realize this, but we experience emotions through hormones. Like when you're happy, you produce serotonin and dopamine. When you're sad or when you're depressed or anxious, especially anxious, when you're anxious, you produce adrenaline and cortisol. Now, so do animals produce, express emotions through these hormones. So you can imagine that when chickens are seeing their brothers and sisters being slaughtered in front of them, are they happy? No, they're highly stressed. So when we consume chicken, we are getting the adrenaline from chicken. Today, so many people are stressed, anxious, depressed because we're consuming the hormones from animals. We are borrowing their emotions, and none of them are happy.
So which means that we are actually building a graveyard in our stomach.
We are, and we are, eating ourselves to death. And, just because it's a commercial activity where, the restaurants, the food producers, everybody stands to win, including the pharmaceutical industry and the doctors and the hospitals. Nobody's saying anything about it.
I think when we talk about animals being slaughtered, whether it is your cow, your calves, your chicken, the fear that they have just before getting killed, that fear automatically gets transferred in our body. And when we have pain and fear within us, because when we consume them, automatically that will have a ripple effect on the health. It will have a ripple effect on the nerve, the entire system, the gut, the way we think, because even our thought process is the outcome of what we eat, the kind of food that we eat. So I think overall, I don't see any benefit of eating something which is not a natural source, and which is something that is not meant to be consumed by human beings. So there is absolutely no logic why where people say that, I mean, animals come as a part of food chain, because a lot of people have this misconception that, like how animal eats another animal, that's a food chain for them. Animal can be consumed by human being, that also becomes a part of food chain, which is absolutely incorrect. So that's a myth that people actually advertise, or they, the food industry, so to say, talks about that, if you don't consume chicken, or if you don't consume xyz, you will always be deficient, and because your b12 and your d3 will have an impact if you don't eat non-vegetarian food.
True, true. And I mean, there's no limit to the amount of myths. Honestly, vitamin B12 is not made by meat, or is not found in meat or milk. It is made by bacteria. And because anything dead is full of bacteria, it may have some B12 in it, but um,
And there are sources for b12. It's not that only if you eat non-vegetarian you get b12, right?
yes, but the fact is today, even the non-vegetarians have B12 deficiency because when you eat meat, then your stomach has to produce more acid. This destroys the stomach lining, and the intrinsic factor in the stomach is not able to absorb the B12. So, non-vegetarians, vegetarians, and vegans all get B12 deficiency, and vitamin D is only produced by the action of the sun on the skin.
Correct.
And if we don't go out sunbathing regularly, we like animals were not supposed to be wearing clothes all day, right? So we would automatically be exposed to the sun rays, which we're not. And we now, as Indians, we don't even want to get darker. So we have to take supplements.
Correct. And what is the biggest perception barrier, according to you, which stops people from embracing a healthier lifestyle or having that compassion? And can they ever move beyond it?
I don't think it's got to do with a perception barrier, but it's actually, as I said, one of the things is social, and the other thing is family. Because if you're living with your family and everyone doesn't want to change, then how are you going to make different food for everyone? So you just kind of like let it be. That kind of thing happens. So I mean, it's a matter of everyone understanding the basics of how they're all getting sick.
Absolutely. Doc, can you give us 5 simple steps if someone wants to convert from any kind of diet to becoming a vegan? What are the 5 simple ways to do that?
Okay, so we actually have a 5-point plan, and I might as well mention that. So, number one is that everything should be plant-based, right? Now, that doesn't have to happen overnight, but let's aim towards plant-based. And people say, oh, you can't get that everywhere. But as far as I've seen, you can get fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains everywhere, right? So, um, and it has to do with mindset, like being a vegetarian and having traveled extensively in a non-vegetarian world. It was my mindset that I don't eat meat, which helped me find vegetarian food wherever I was. And when I switched to vegan, I just realized that it's a mindset, because you can go anywhere in the world and say I'm vegetarian, plus I'm allergic to milk, or I'm lactose intolerant, or whatever you want to say, and you will get food, right? So when we change our mindset, just like, a Muslim will say, I don't eat pig, or a Hindu may say, I don't eat beef. I mean, I'm just saying, like, then it's just a matter of mindset. Like if I see a restaurant menu, I'm already not looking in the chicken section or the meat section. So automatically I'm seeing the things that are vegetarian or vegan and selecting, right? So it's just mindset. It's that shift that people need to be aware that this is our original food. We need to make that shift and we can get healthy. And also, they need to understand that vegetarians are getting the exact same diseases as non vegetarians. So, once that awareness comes, because I think that I love animals and you love animals, but the whole world doesn't. That's the reality. So it's not just loving animals. Most of the urban population is far removed from animals because we're living in a concrete jungle. And so we cannot make that connection, you know. But we all can make the connection with our health. We all can see how we feel when we eat the wrong foods and when we eat the right foods. So I said, number one, plant based. Number two, whole foods. Now that's a graduation, right? First you get plant based and then whole foods because we are the only species that makes our food less nutritious before eating by refining. Why should we eat refined foods? Once you recognize that, it's really easy to do. And then the third is organic because we're the only species that sprays our food with poison so that other animals don't eat it. And then we eat it. Like, are we less intelligent than them? And I know that, farmers, whoever spray pesticides, they have a separate field just for them because they know the dangers. Always, always. So we have to think twice about this. And then, so plant based, whole food, organic, vitamin B12 and vitamin D to be checked and supplemented. And that's very, very easy to do.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Suman.
Doc, there's a very interesting myth, or I would say fact, I really don't know because we have to check the history once again. Uh, in olden times when they used to actually depict somebody who was very good and, somebody who was a saint would actually eat sattvic khana.
Yes.
And somebody who would be projected as Rakshas would be eating meat. And they would show that, he's eating something which is, related with meat and, something which would definitely not be a food which is consumed by humans. So, why was that kind of projection done?
Actually, Sattvic, like for example, B.K. Shivani often talks about how Jaisa An Vaisa Man, like how um, food affects our state of mind, right? And um, I think in the past, when people used to go for war, they used to eat meat to make them more aggressive and, able to fight. Whereas people who wanted to lead a more saintly life or a more meditative or peaceful life would not eat meat. They would eat something more sattvic. So I think it has a connection to that.
And a lot of
That
people who have this misconception that only when I will eat non vegetarian, I will get a lot of energy. Whereas when we see role models and examples like Virat Kohli, who also turned from being a non vegetarian to a vegetarian or rather vegan now. His wife, Anushka Sharma, is a vegan. So, what do you have to say for such people? Because they completely change the narrative of being healthy because they are absolutely Virat Kohli is one of the most fit person in our country.
Right, and there are many like that. So there's a beautiful film called The Game Changers, which is about Olympic level athletes who are vegan. And there are so many of them, like Djokovic. He's vegan, right? And there are so many like this that, and actually they're doing it not just for animal rights or environment, but just because it's better for your own energy levels and game. So when we don't spend energy on digesting by eating foods that our body is designed to digest, automatically we have more energy.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I think this was a great insight. Now, I have a last question for you, and that is the breaking the mirror segment. And I would like to ask you that what is that one life changing realization you wish every listener could take away from this conversation? What would that be?
I would say just one thing, and the reason I'm saying this is because I believe that almost everyone consumes dairy, not everyone consumes meat, and dairy can come in every single meal of most people. That just recognize that milk is a fluid that any mother makes only for her baby. And so if you consume any dairy product, you're depriving a baby of its mother's milk. And there could be no greater sin than that.
Absolutely. And I think this last point actually touches everybody's nerve. And if they truly realize, if we all rather truly realize and start taking steps towards becoming vegan, I think there will be a lot of change and a lot of inner transformation, not just amongst humans, but also in the animals, who should be looked at with a lot of compassion and empathy.
Yes, I mean, we have to recognize that they are co travelers on this journey called life with us. And we are actually symbiotic. I mean, we cannot live without them and they cannot live without us. And once we recognize that, we can't even live without our gut contains 10 times more bacteria than all the cells in our body. And we have to live in harmony with these. And if we don't, we can die. That means, I've seen people in hospital given antibiotics after antibiotics and dying because they don't have the symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their gut anymore. And they,
Wonderful. This was such a, I would say, wholesome conversation, because a lot of insights emerged out of this, and a lot of awareness has been brought. And I'm sure all those people who will be seeing this podcast will also get a lot of information, knowledge, education about what veganism is all about and how to have a healthy and a complete lifestyle where they can feel, act, and believe in the system of living organically.
yes, and I just want to mention that Sharan helps in so many ways. Like we have recipes, cooking classes, online programs for all kinds of things so that wherever you have the gap, we can help you.
And absolutely, the biggest roadblock where people think that veganism means कि अब क्या खाएंगे, because there are no options. So Sharan is a very good platform where they can actually find recipes, where
Absolutely.
they
We
can
have
actually,
600 healthy recipes on our
oh
website
wow.
to replace meat and milk and dairy and all kinds of things, and even oil and harmful substances. So,
So we've already started taking the first step towards getting organically moving towards the lifestyle of being healthy, being mindful, and living completely organic life. Thank you so much, Dr. Shah. It was lovely having you and having this wonderful conversation.
thank you for having me.
Great insight that you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you.
ये सिर्फ एक कॉन्वर्सेशन नहीं, बल्कि एक अवेकनिंग थी. आज हमने जाना कि परसेप्शन एक रियलिटी बन सकती है. सिर्फ एक छोटी सी शिफ्ट की जरूरत है. आपका खाना सिर्फ आपकी हेल्थ नहीं, बल्कि आपकी सोच, दुनिया और आपके वैल्यूज को भी शेप करता है. अगर आज की बात ने नए पर्सपेक्टिव का दरवाजा खोला है, तो एक स्टेप लीजिए, सोचिए, समझिए और बदलिए. मिलते हैं अगले एपिसोड में. स्टे कॉन्शियस, स्टे काइंड एंड गो बियॉन्ड.